this 1 kilometre hill climb. Jack Massey there from the Newcastle Motor Racing Club about to give Doug the starting flag. The first special stage in the NBN Classic Rally. No one's quite sure which way this course goes. A lot of revs, and he's away. Snatches second gear, quite a low differential, so there's not much space between the gears. Down, Sam has to look for a little bit of traction. Now, back the other way. And looking for a gear. Precious seconds lost there. Not the best way for a hill climb. Now, into the right-hander, climbing right-hander. Understeering a little there, getting the power on a bit late. Looking for where the course goes. Nice wide entry to that corner. A lot of dust. As you can see from this dust, in actual rallying at night, it's very, very difficult for the following competitors to overtake. Lots of power on there, the limited slip diff giving drive to both back wheels. The passage control there, quite an exciting approach to that. I don't think I'd like to be that control official for anything. And that's the corner that we think might trap them. It's a downhill right-hander, very easy to understeer there. Got to be very brave to get on the power, but now he really has got that power down, setting it up nicely and really motoring towards the timing mark. Wouldn't like to count the revs, but quite an impressive time, 1:16. We think they'll go faster than that. We think the fastest time of the day will be better than that, but it remains to be seen.
What time, lad?
So 1:16.4, the time to beat. Second competitor, Pat Roberts from Port Macquarie, in a car that you'll see, in fact, 18 others, very similar to this. Datsuns dominate clubman rallying. They're relatively cheap to build. You can spend $20,000 building a Datsun like this. Some competitors, though, have built one for $3,500, $4,000. 2-litre engine, Webbers, better brakes, 5-speed gearbox, and they're the formula for relatively cheap rallying. Pat Roberts from Port Macquarie. Fairly neat approach. Well, it was neat until he realised the course went one way and he went the other way. Now, this sort of an excursion is the sort of thing that happens in the forest at night, and you don't really hear much about it unless the navigator tells you. But it really is quite typical of rallying. And of course it's why the cars have to be tough. It doesn't matter how well you strengthen a car, if you hit a bigger bump, big enough bump, fast enough, you will bend something. All of these cars are using strengthened suspensions. Most are using gas pressure shock absorbers to resist any fade during the night of rallying. And they really are very, very controllable on a loose dirt surface. As you can see, the technique is, if possible, to get the tail out before the corner. It's much easier to drive a car on opposite lock than to run into that understeering situation as we saw with both these cars. Pat's got it sorted out now, going very, very quickly on that downhill corner. That's quite a fast corner there. He seems to be a little bit hard to pick what gear he's in, but I would say he'd be well into third. Right, while you were away, we had Jack Whiteman from Newcastle having a similar excursion to Pat Roberts on that first right-hander just over the crest. So that's obviously going to prove troublesome for drivers who haven't really seen this course. Most of them haven't seen this course before. Car 4, Geoff McKay and Mal Sinfield in yet another Datsun, one of the 19 Datsun 1600s. Quite an old car, 16-year-old, even older than some of them. But of course rebuilt, a bit like Grandma's axe, 10 new heads and 6 new handles. It's a brand new axe. And car 4 sputtering a bit there in the Webbers as he pumps some petrol into it and away. Now this is the corner that's tricky. Over a crest, quite loose on the outside. Drivers getting stirred up, accelerating, but through it nicely. Now here is where you can save time, but a little bit too far, bounces off the bank, European-style rallying when you start using the banks. Up into the right-hander. Neat inside, looking for some traction again. It's where a lot of horsepower can help. You can dig through the loose stuff and really get some bite. Because it is hard on the tyres. A very competitive rally car can use up a set of rear tyres in as little as 100 kilometres. Most of these competitors, however, will not be changing tyres through the night unless they get a puncture. This is the amateur level of rallying. It's the aptly named the Clubman Rally, Clubman division of rallying, and it's where people can have a lot of fun but not too much expense. Not that rallying's ever cheap. Geoff McKay doing a fairly neat job there. A little bit of a problem understeering on that downhill corner. Left and right down to the finishing marker, and probably 120. So on our unofficial timing, 120.5 is good enough to put Geoff in second position at this stage. Some spectators here, quite a few coming out to watch, and rallying is quite exciting really. Even through the night we expect to see spectators out in the forest watching some of the cars perform. Got car 5, Steve Kepner, another Newcastle driver, with Jim Gleeson, who normally navigates for a well-known driver locally, Gary Burns, who's a fairly frightening driver for the navigator. So Jim should have quite a nice ride with Steve. This is Steve's first rally after a break of 12 months. He's not running a Datsun, as you can see. He's running a Galant. It's a car he's actually owned for 9 years. It's down on horsepower compared to the Datsuns, and you can notice that as he punches up the hill. But it's very, very reliable. And Steve drives well. Fairly neat line there. Makes the most of the car. But naturally would love another 100 horsepower or so. You can hear the engine dying as he hits the steep pinch there. Up to the control. Just to grab a card from the control official. This, of course, is just to make things a little more difficult for the drivers, and it simulates the type of section they'll face later in the night, where they have to pass through control points to make sure that they did, in fact, follow the correct route. Steve Kepner very nicely down through the downhill left-hander, setting up for the left and right, out to the outside edge of the road, a little bit wide on the second right-hander, and down to the timing marker. But a good time, 117.6, so it just shows that horsepower isn't everything. Steve well down on horsepower to some of the other cars, but now in second position. Only the Mazda Rotary faster with a time of 116.4. As you can see, if you think this is tricky, it naturally gets a lot trickier at night. In spite of the powerful quartz iodine driving lights that all the cars run, driving at night does have its special difficulties. Little traps, often you can come down to a creek and see a reflection and think it's a car coming the other way, and it's just your lights bouncing off the water. In fact, of course, the roads are closed to other traffic, but there's always that instant of hesitation when you see something that you don't quite understand. Car 6, John Dean from Newcastle, and Paul Bramble in a Galant. Paul's spent quite a bit of time driving as well as navigating, and John having a little bit of trouble with our tricky corner there. Sorted that out, and of course lost some valuable seconds. Now has to try and concentrate and get the act together, see where he can pick up some time. The Galant not as powerful as the Datsuns, but has lost a little more time now. Tried to hook it into a tight line up through the corner, and the tail just continued to come around on him. Did the right thing though, and stopped before he did any damage. The whole concept of having this hill climb as the first stage of the rally is the idea of the rally director, who is Murray Finlay. For many years, besides reading news, Murray has played with rally cars, both as a driver and as a rally organiser. And organising a rally is not an easy job. It requires a lot of paperwork, and nice run down through the finish there. It's a pity that John Dean wasted time in those two corners early, because that finish was a good run, but of course that's going to put his time back 1:33.1. Next car away, car 9. And Greg Kotermine and Lance Robertson from Newcastle in Datsun. And we'll see if Greg can sort it out a little bit better than some of the earlier competitors. The tricky corner is this one over the hill. They can't quite see where they're going, arrive a little late, and very easy to run wide. But Greg has got it right now. Big wide approach to that corner, and this time is looking good. Greg appears to be the fastest to this point so far. Uphill, nice tight line, not out in the pebbles on the outside. Looking for traction, blipping the throttle and attempting to find some traction. It's very loose, as you can see. Into the little downhill loop. Staying tidy, up into the top now, up to the passage control. A lot of revs there. Greg's car, a highly modified Datsun 1600, 2-litre engine, Weber carburetors, and Greg doing a nice job sorting this hill climb out pretty well. Staying in tight. Now it's a flat-out run down through this left and right-hander, setting up, flicking the car one way, then the other way, keeping the power into it. Nice tight line on the inside, and this looks like a very good time. 1:16.9. Good enough on our unofficial timing to put him into second place. Doug Briscoe in the Mazda Rotary, still fastest, car 1, with 1:16.4. But you can see there that Greg was doing it right most of the way, keeping the car in tight. And really that's how it is in rallying too. Car 11 now, we seem to have lost car 10, which was a Commodore. Obviously failed to start. Gary Rees from Sydney, been rallying a couple of years. Yet another of the everlasting Datsuns. This one bored out to 1940 cc's. Most of them put out around 90 horsepower or so at the back wheels. So they're probably developing maybe 140 horsepower, some of them a lot more than that, at the flywheel. The hill climb presents something of a different sort of challenge for rally drivers. Most of the stages naturally are much longer than this, and there's always the feeling in rallying that you can pick up your mistakes later on. In fact, of course, it's not true. Once you lose, any fraction of a second is lost forever, and the top rally drivers treat every stage, no matter if it's 100 kilometres long, as a hill climb, looking for every tenth of a second they can save. But of course, to win you also have to finish, and that means staying on the road. And that's the whole art of rally driving, finding that balance between going fast enough and staying on the road and keeping the car in one piece. Fairly cautious run there by Gary Rees. Realises he's got 430 kilometres to go through the night, doesn't really want to bend it on the first stage, with a time of 1:23.2. The principal sponsor of the event today, of course, is NBN 3, which has provided all the outright prize money, and other sponsors are CIG, which is offering prize money for the best performances in each driver classification, and City Spares, which is providing the cash for fastest time on 2 other competitive sections. We've got next car up, one of the few non-Datsuns, this one a Lancer, car 12, Warren Ridge and Paul Bailey, out to beat a time of 1:16.4. Doug Briscoe in the Mazda Rotary, car 1, having set the fastest time of the day on the hill climb. Everyone else now out to beat that time. Round to the left there. very important for drivers to keep their cars pretty much in the middle of the track. It'd be very easy to damage a tyre hooking into some of the large boulders on the outside edge of the track, and of course you waste time. Up to the control. Quickly through the passage control there. Now the tricky left-hander downhill. Very easy to understeer wide here. Deciding just when to get your foot on the loud pedal and get the tail out. Same here, being very cautious around the inside. Down towards the finish. 1:16.4 the time to beat. Warren Ridge looking for a time. 1:19.5. Not a bad time at all. Showing that even though he wasn't spectacular as some of the others, he had saved time by taking nice tidy lines on the corners.
Look serious, love, don't smile. I'm sure.
Car 13, Mick Howard from Beresfield, and his wife, Marisa Howard, one of only 2 lady navigators in the event, or co-drivers. Her job to call out the very precise instructions provided to competitors throughout the night, read down the distance to intersections, call out any cautions of rough creek crossings, badly rutted roads, stumps on the side of the road, all the information that is provided by the rally director. I'm not quite sure whether she really called that corner. I would say that Mick Howard will get the rounds of the kitchen when he gets home for that sort of a mistake from his wife, who's sitting in the passenger seat and wondering what the rest of the night's going to be like. Obviously Mick isn't too worried. We can see him with a big smile on his face there, saying, made a mistake like that on television, I guess I've got to sort it out now. Whoops. Somewhere in there is a control official who is obviously could take up bullfighting. It just needs a little red flag to step behind. MacLeod being very spectacular in the Datsun. Husband and wife team going very quickly downhill. And finishing in a most spectacular manner somewhere in that dust is Mick Howard's Datsun, sort of on the road, but he's sorted it out now. Well, obviously his wife has lots of faith in him, is prepared to sit there. Here's a replay of Mick's fairly spectacular approach to the hill climb, and to the control official. Now that control official's try and get the card in the right-hand window, and Mick's not making it very easy. Nice little ballet step by the control official, though, manages to let the car slide underneath his knees. Right, well. Car 14, Gary Masters, Kerry Horn, in what's called a production rally car. Less modified than the others, and an attempt to make rallying cheaper for the clubman competitor. Only certain modifications are allowed, like Group A. And the theory is that if you can keep things simpler, then the rallying should be cheaper. Mazda, though, is suffering from a noticeable misfire as it heads up the hill. You can hear the apparently the ignition breaking down. And that's going to cause Gary Masters from Bulladila a few worries, wondering whether his problem's going to get worse during the night or will get better as things warm up. Very cautious control official waiting till the car actually stops and then handing in that all-important card. Fastest time on the hill climb so far, 1:16.4. And unlikely that Gary Masters will beat that time, being fairly cautious, but then remembering he's got some distance to go tonight. Some 300 kilometres of highly competitive driving on closed forest roads. 1:21.7. Car 16, Richard Opie, typical of the way competitors are prepared to travel to compete in these events. Down from Tamworth, Stephen Maguire navigating for him. The car, a Lancer. A few years under its belt, but remember how well the Lancers used to do in the old Southern Cross Rally. Dominated the event, won year after year after year, with Andrew Cowd at the wheel. A very tough little car. And certainly the sort of car you expect to finish an event. May not be the fastest, but usually always a finisher. Chidope down into the tight left-hander and looking very neat. Car naturally not a standard Lancer. Modified engine, again dual Webers. Limited slip differential up into the left-hander, down into the loop. This time's looking good. Not getting the car too sideways. Up to the control official. Neatly off down the hill again. Lining up the corner. This is the tricky one. This is where you really can pick up time. Perhaps he's being a little bit too slow. I had a short run around the course in one of our news vehicles, which of course is not really a competitive rally car, and it was quite interesting to see just where the tricks are. I would tip that downhill left-hander as the place where you could really make up time by keeping it tidy. 1:18. A good time, and good enough to put Richard Opie in third place. In looking inside the rally car there, you can probably see in front of the driver a tachometer. Very important the driver can just glance down and see just how many revs he's using. Obviously, if he over-revs the engine, then he's looking for mechanical trouble. But with the sort of roads that you're operating on, you haven't got too much time to be taking a second look. Car 17. This time a Datsun 1200 from Armidale. Chris Pearce making that same mistake on that first left-hander. Sorted it out fairly quickly though. Got things operating fairly well now. Up into the right-hander. Been competing since 1971, so he should know his way around the forestry tracks by now. Rallying's a sport that builds a lot of camaraderie. Competitors get to know each other coming to these events. And, of course, to compete too, you need quite a lot of friends. Most of them will have friends driving service cars around through the night, carrying spare wheels, fuel, perhaps a spare alternator, spare shock absorbers, in case they need those vital things. The tyres, of course, all winter tread radials. Developed for rallying. Fairly open tread pattern. The more sophisticated tyres use quite soft rubber mixes, as do racing tyres, but naturally they wear out quickly, and for the Clubman competitor, most of them will go for a tyre that's a compromise, provides a little bit better wear. There's a close-up there. You can see once you start pumping 100 horsepower or so through that, you're going to tear those chunks of rubber off fairly quickly when you're getting wheel spin. Can wear a tyre out in 100 kilometres or even less in a very, very powerful car. But most of these cars should see the night out on those tyres. Of course, in highly competitive rallying too, once the sharp edge is worn off the tyre, then you're losing seconds, and naturally you'd be looking, if you had a factory car, to be replacing those tyres. Steve Cox way in yet another Datsun. 19 of these Datsun 1600s. The absolutely typical Australian rally car now. Making that typical mistake of most of the competitors here. It's a little confusing. They come over a hill. There appears to be a track ahead. They've been told there is a left-hander, but they're getting it wrong. And it's a case of reactions, just how well they sort that out. The rally could, of course, be won and lost on the hill climb. They'll lose points to the quarter of a minute here, and and although it's unlikely, the event could be won by as little as a smaller margin of 1 point. So it is pretty important the drivers do get it right here, and as well there's $100 waiting for the fastest time of the day, $60 for second place. So far Doug Briscoe from Sydney in the Mazda Rotary has that fastest time of the day with 1:16.4. Steve Cox sorting out that downhill left-hander, setting it up through the sort of corner that rally drivers love, where you've got a left and right-hander. It's a case of setting it sideways into the first half, a little bit of overcorrection, the tail comes out the other way to line up down towards the exit, and a finish for Steve Cox. Fair bit of dust around. Dust, of course, is always a problem in rallying. There's the other important instrument for rally drivers, that's the Halder Twin Master. It reads distance to 1/100th of a kilometre, and he's able to zero that. The navigator has his hand there on the zero button. He'll zero that. That'll give an accurate reading, so that as he calls instructions, and he can say 1/10th to a left-hander, which he should have called there, and yes, he has got the instruction right. 1/10 to a left-hander now, and that'll go on all through the night. Very important the navigator stays alert, and of course you need to be fairly resistant to car sickness to be able to keep your head down on a section that has a lot of instructions, keep calling those instructions to the driver, and not feel squeamish at the same time. In fact, I think to sit alongside many a rally driver takes a very special sort of person. Car 19, Mike Chorley is from Corindai, running a relatively standard Datsun. Again, one of the production rally car class of cars in the production rally car classification. It's quite a mouthful. Put simply, it simply means that the cars are less modified than the outright contenders. Within the rally there are various classifications, and they'll be looking to take up that classification. You can see the cars perhaps not quite as exciting to drive as some of the more powerful ones, but then you're only dropping, in this case, at the most, perhaps 6 seconds on the fastest car that's been up there so far. 1:16.4 the fastest. Peter Roberts, brother of Pat Roberts, car 2 in the event. Peter and Pat both from Port Macquarie. Peter rolled this car in the last event, said he's determined to keep it the right way up this time. Drives with a lot of verve, and having that trouble with that first corner, sorted it out though before he wasted too much time. Found the tight one, and now getting down to the serious business of the hill climb. You see the right-hand side of the car still bearing some scars from the last event in which it rolled. These cars are pretty tough though. They usually put them back on the wheels and away they go again. All are fitted with roll cages, and naturally the crew are wearing harnesses. Safety is a major consideration to rally drivers, as in all motorsport. They make sure any sharp projections around the inside of the vehicle are either padded or well out of the way of any arms and legs, anything that might contact in the event of an accident. Now, that was getting that left-hander neat and tight on the inside, and this could well be the way to pick up time. Not being spectacular, but finding the fast way. And 1:23. So perhaps a little bit slow, perhaps a little bit too cautious. Next up, Chris Jensen. You can see the alloy roll cage that we talked about earlier in there, right through the car. Hold the roof up in the event of a roll. Chris Jensen from Newcastle, having his 5th rally in this event. Now we'll see how Chris sorts out this problem corner when drivers are apt to go the wrong way. Seems to know that way. But has decided that there is a much shorter way to the finish line and has headed off down entirely the wrong road. Of course, this sort of thing in rallying can easily happen out in the forest at night, but nobody sees it. When you're watching on television, it's a little bit embarrassing. The whole point of rallying, of course, is that the car is running against the clock. Competitors are set effectively an average speed for a section, but that average is always impossible. So it's really a case of finding the fast way around, and of course it does have to be the right way. Christiansen having more troubles, turning right instead of left on the loop. And under the rules of rallying, had he continued, he'd have entered a control point up there from the wrong direction. Up to the control official. Christiansen away down the hill, having made a couple of wrong directions so far. And understeering very much on that downhill corner. Being more cautious on this one. And looking for the finish line. Well, of course, that's where consistent driving can often put a low-powered car well up in a rally. The driver or the crew that work well together, call their corners accurately, and don't waste a tenth here and a tenth there, can easily end up saving minutes throughout the night. Car 24, Andrew Chapman, first time out in this car. His first Clubman event, has only run in a couple of minor rallies previously, and Andrew will probably be feeling his way in this event. Although so far he looks very neat and tidy. The car obviously nowhere near as powerful as some of the earlier Datsuns. Car 24 of 32 starters, a couple of non-starters. So in fact around 30 cars competing in the NBN Classic 300 Rally. The event will take them up into the forestry country in the Stroud Dealer area throughout the night. Something like 300 kilometres of competitive motoring. The forestry roads closed to other traffic, and drivers having to drive pretty much as you're seeing them here right throughout the night. Naturally, that calls for a lot of concentration and skill. But rallying seems to get into the blood. Most drivers who take it up seem to keep coming back and back to have a run. There's certainly something fairly exciting about setting the car up, getting it sideways through the corner, feeling the balance of power and steering. And especially satisfying when you do get to the finish of an event, the car's in one piece and you've done well.
15 made it to the finish line. Matthew Clark reports.
Most of the drivers who withdrew from the rally did so during last night's tough sections through the forestry areas around Dealer and Stroud. With drivers moving at excessive speeds, the night sections posed special problems, and the extremely dusty conditions made the driver's task all that more difficult. The majority of people who pulled out did so because of mechanical failure, but for some, errors in judgment sent their cars over embankments or into trees. No one was hurt in the handful of crashes, but it emphasised just how difficult the sections were for both the navigators and drivers. Locals John Dean and Paul Bramble in car 6 took out the rally with an outstanding performance, finishing 2.5 minutes ahead of second place Doug Briscoe. With the rally organisers still working up the final placings in the Clubman Championship, it appears Brian Fisher and Peter Berryman in a stanza have just edged home ahead of the car of Pat Roberts and Steve Wallace. Local driver Greg Cotton withdrew from last night's rally with mechanical trouble, but still managed to take out 4th place in the championship.